Hey everybody, today I am going to be reviewing Terminator 2 Judgment Day. This was directed by James Cameron. The first Terminator was very successful, a more intimate film naturally than the later entries, but it made an action star of Arnold Schwarzenegger, and it also proved that James Cameron was quite a formidable director. He always expressed interest in a sequel, even though the rights to the Terminator franchise, it just seems like at all times, was a very complicated, very messy thing. It sounds quite nightmarish to me. Honestly, this is maybe my favorite James Cameron movie. I might have to think about it a little bit, but as of now, I think it is my favorite. Now, having said that, I'm not the biggest James Cameron fan, but I do think that his work is very enjoyable, and I certainly admire him a ton. And as I said, the original Terminator film was more intimate, and it had more of that horror edge to it that kind of came out of the late 1970s and the early 80s. But now we have a film that is very ambitious, the second entry, and it's quite a departure from the original film. What I found interesting about Terminator 2, and I think this is both a fantastic thing about it, but it's also a little bit of a detriment. It feels like the movie has its feet kind of in two worlds. I mean, it's very clear that James Cameron is incredibly ambitious and he's pushing towards something very modern, something very fresh that we haven't seen before. But the framework for Terminator does feel more like, a very chiseled, tight, action, like 90-minute runtime type of movie. So that feeling, but combined with the James Cameron like epic mentality, he always has that like old grand Hollywood sort of feel to him in terms of like what he's shooting for. That feeling, that tone is a little bit mixed for me at times. And just the movie has a few loose threads here and there that kind of bug me at times. But I do think overall it's an extraordinary film, and I think it is one of the great big, summer blockbuster type of sequels I've ever seen. There is enough balance between the two ideas that I mentioned here, the two tones, where you can tell that it's shaping into something very cool, and you're excited to see where things go in the future because it is very innovative, very groundbreaking. But we haven't forgotten our roots as well, as in we just aren't too big for our britches yet. We haven't gotten all that Academy Award acclaim just yet, and I miss the James Cameron of those times. I miss the James Cameron of the 1980s and the early 90s when he wasn't so uptight. And not to say he wasn't difficult or anything, but I don't know, I feel like the narcissism wasn't quite as strong as it became, pre-Titanic, pre-Avatar. These older movies do have a much more tactile quality to them, in my opinion. And I do think that it showcases James Cameron at his very best at times. And I picked this movie to do like an old nostalgic summer movie review just because I feel it's important to always do something like that over the summer, like a summer classic. But this one in particular I find to be just kind of quintessential American blockbuster that encompasses a very specific period of time in America where we're kind of riding the tail of the Reagan-era presidency, a major romanticism and like a flexing sort of mentality that America had, and it of course echoes into the pop culture of the time. But at the same time, with a movie like this, it doesn't feel too shameless in the sense that there's real technique behind it and a real elegance to the filmmaking. And this film, when you watch it today, it's pretty extraordinary just how well it holds up, how well a lot of the special effects hold up, especially how well a lot of the big chase sequences, the action sequences hold up. I think the kinds of people who are very ambitious, who enjoy a really great practical effect sort of chase sequence, like a Christopher Nolan as an example, I think he naturally probably finds a lot to admire in this, and he's heavily influenced by it, I think. But more than anything, what I love about this movie is that it is a pre-9/11 American blockbuster. I really miss pre-9/11 big action movies, big Hollywood movies, because they represent a time when I think that America was far less self-conscious. It's like we knew our own doom was coming and we could prophesize it, like in the movies that we created, the entertainment, such as Independence Day. And that was, of course, before we were knocked down a few pegs, and then we became so afraid of our own shadow that we could no longer make movies that showcase any real violence or brutality. Since then, it has felt very watered down. I don't feel it. But there is a texture to T2. I really do feel a lot of the impact of everything in that movie. And I can't say that about a lot of the future Cameron movies, to the same degree at least. When I first saw T2, I was maybe 9 years old, 10 years old. It was maybe 1999 or the year 2000 when I finally got to see it. And I just remember just the opening, maybe the first 5-10 minutes of the movie. I remember being very, very surprised shocked by a lot of the violence, but also being like, yes, this movie is taking me seriously and I can't believe I'm allowed to watch it. And that's another thing. It is a movie that was clearly marketed for, you know, all kinds of people, but definitely there's marketing towards kids. And yet it is a rated R film, and you just, yeah, I just miss it. I miss that time. It felt like a lot of movies aimed at kids were very dark, very brutal, and it felt very like, it's fine, you know. Yes, it is a little bit self-serious at times, and I do think there is a disconnect between some of the dialogue, especially, and the humor, because, you know, naturally it is James Cameron, and much like George Lucas, he's just a little bit awkward. We love him for it, but we're also kind of frustrated by it. This movie, particularly the first third of the movie, I think it has a fantastic pulsing sort of energy to it. I love the mall sequence and just like the capitalist showcase of the time, for sure. It's very nostalgic for me, but also just that image of the hitman and in all leather just tearing through all of these innocent people to get to John Connor with this, again, that steely, unrelenting sort of massive energy. And that's the great thing about James Cameron, is he never lets you forget what is at stake. This whole movie just feels like, you know, you're running from something, but there is an unstoppable force, and it is just coming, and it will eat anything in its path. And you, yeah, again, the core of this movie is you feel that heft. It's unrelenting, but each sequence kind of slowly builds and then settles into this really interesting sort of energy and then keeps building. It's fantastic tension. So many of these sequences I think are really amazing. I think one of the best ones is that opening sequence where, you know, it's the truck chase where the T-1000 is chasing John Connor. Just the way the camera works with the choreography of everything. It is very fluid. There is such a rhythm to it. There's a really nice arc to everything, and it allows you to kind of focus in and understand what is going on. But again, the pace is very quick at the same time. At the center of this movie, we have our American boy John Connor, and he is kind of the deviant child, and he is played with a very cynical kind of darkness by Edward Furlong. And while I don't think that James Cameron is very good with actors, and I feel that way certainly about this movie, I think that was a good casting choice, just because, I don't know if you've seen the actor just, you know, in his later life, but he is quite a quirky individual, and, you know, he obviously had many issues of his own behind the scenes, and I don't know, you can kind of sense that energy, that edge to him, even as a kid here. It's very palpable and it works, but there's also a very kind of unprotected kind of wild vulnerability to him that you can feel he is trying to shield from us, and it's quite sad, you know, his eyes. And as an audience member, at least I did, you kind of want to just jump in there and help him to harness it, and that's, I think, you know, a good sign for sure. Not having a paternal or maternal figure here is a major key to the emotional part of the movie, and it's sad because he was born into such dark circumstances. He does feel a lot more like a 13, 14-year-old, because I think that's how old the kid was. I don't know what they were thinking by saying he's 10 years old here, but whatever. One of the best things about this movie, or I should say one of my favorite performances in the movie, I'm going to be very honest with you, was Arnold Schwarzenegger. I truly think that he's fantastic in this role, and he's one of the best of these types, you know, a symbol, you know, of the macho kind of 1980s sort of guy. The Terminator works, I think, because of the self-awareness. It works because it understands the humor of it. It understands that Arnold is quite funny, and they really capitalize on that here. Now, I've only seen the first 3 Terminator films, but I really think that Arnold is fantastic in all of them because, you know, like, he can play like deadpan, but can also be very funny while also being deadpan, and of course, naturally, part of that is due to his accent. But I don't think that's all it is. I think there's more than that. If it were just the accent, I think he would be a lot more forgettable. I think you can really sense his humanity and his sincerity underneath all of that. And the emotional scenes with John, you know, even though he's supposed to be a robot, they're really emotionally powerful, at least to me. But again, what's great is he's never wavering too much from that deadpan, and if he did, naturally, I wouldn't believe in it as much. I love the T-1000, but I think everybody does. Those very cold, icy blue eyes are fantastic. I think he's one of the great action villains of his time, and I think part of why is because, again, he's very unexpected. The choice to go with that is very unexpected. You don't see this person and expect them to be able to go head to head with Arnold Schwarzenegger and be effective. But they go for the anti-Arnold Schwarzenegger, which is a really ingenious idea where he's not all like prowess. He's not, you know, like just like overstuffed 1980s machismo sort of thing. This guy is very sinewy. He's lean and he's fit and he's very quick. There's an elegance to his movement, and that sort of control adds another level of fear to it. And again, that contrast from the kind of more bull in the china shop mentality of an Arnold Schwarzenegger. But that more stealthy type of movement, again, it's very chilling, because this guy feels more like a diver, or almost like an Olympic swimmer, or even like a ballet dancer. Because as I said, more in control, more polished, so you sense he's doing things with a lot more sound technique, and obviously much more updated technology. And then there is Sarah Connor, who is my spirit animal. I love her. I love Sarah Connor, just because I think she's one of the great action heroines, especially of her time, one that I actually approve of. As people know who watch this channel, I am often quite critical of a lot of female action heroes, because I often feel they're not believable. It's hard for me to take them seriously. And for the first time, this woman actually felt like somebody who could kick ass. Like, they actually made that feel believable. A lot of the times, it's surprising to me how often they'll pick somebody who is very beautiful or something, but not very athletic. Or, they'll have a female doing all this action sort of choreography, but she's kicking in high heels, and it's just like, I don't like that. I think you've got to pick a believable woman if she's going to be somebody who is really tough, and I think Linda Hamilton really went for it. This lady got ripped for this. She is so spry here, and she's a hardened killer. She's not sexualized at any point, but yet she hasn't lost the femininity to her. She still very much feels like a woman. And it's not the Mary Sue sort of thing. It's not like she's overly capable and that there's nothing that she can't tackle. They're not making her seem like a superhero. This seems like a woman who at one point was maybe more petite, maybe more diminutive, but she has had to adapt a sort of masculine energy. She's had to adapt masculine traits through her need to survive. And I just think that's an amazing arc for her character. And again, something you do not see coming. It's doing cool things, of course. Having a woman who was just like a waitress, just an average young lady, and then she is thrown into extraordinary circumstances. And now, after, maybe 10 years, how does that harden her? What does that turn her into? And it makes all the sense in the world, where at this point she would be almost completely unrecognizable compared to that first film. And think of all the PTSD from her experience, and the heartbreak of losing somebody and being separated from her child. And then she is trapped in this mental institution, and she's getting prepared every day. She's just like working out all this stuff, trying to prepare herself for what's about to happen and prepare the people around her who, for what's about to happen, even though they're not listening to her. In the hospital sequence, the Galleria sequence, it's just this great sense of space James Cameron has. And of course, as I said, a great sense of movement. And it's just the details and every little thing that happens, every moment in these action sequences, they do not feel like they're just there to be cool. An explosion is not just there for the sake of an explosion. It's all, fitting into something. It is trying to serve a mood. I'm not the biggest Titanic fan, and I've said that many times, but I do think he does an amazing job with the sequence of the ship sinking. I admit I actually don't think that sequence holds up nearly as well as some of the stuff in Terminator 2, but I like the idea. It's like the setting off the chain reaction of events when that ship is sinking, and just capturing that building tension is really brilliant. Everything means something, and every special effect again is serving a greater purpose. And in T2, obviously the special effects were revolutionary at the time, but there's also so much practical stuff going on here. So many of these sequences and so much of the explosions and the car crashes, it's all very real, and you can see that. So it is the combination of that with the the CGI and all of that is what makes this feel really interesting. The chase with the helicopter towards the end of the movie is really impressive too. Now I have to admit, by that point in the film, I was starting to feel kind of numb to a lot of the clanging and the scraping of metal for maybe 2 hours plus. James Cameron is not very good at building relationships with his characters, the character dynamics. And so, like I mentioned, the acting and the dialogue, it's very wooden here. It's not particularly relatable or authentic, but it gets the job done, I think. And there is a midsection here where we are building more our character relationships, and I did enjoy some of that. I especially really enjoyed the stuff with the Terminator and John Connor in particular, but and then, Sarah is kind of she's going off in the distance and kind of going into her own personal space, where we see kind of a lot of bitterness she has towards men. But I think the pacing here is a little bit of an issue. It feels slightly thin compared to a lot of the other stuff that we are seeing. And I do think that the climax, as I mentioned, there's something about the calamity that makes me feel numb to it at that point. It's not as dynamic to me as the opening, and especially like the hospital and that big chase, the truck chase at the beginning. And it is dragging just a tad again, because I can feel James Cameron Cameron is wanting this to be more of like a meaty epic of sorts, and I just don't think it quite has all those pieces there at this point. I do think better writing could have really helped things, given it a little bit more density. Call me crazy, but I actually think that the characters, especially the dynamics and the way they're written, is better in Terminator 3. And I'm not saying that T3 is better than T2. Absolutely not. I don't feel that way at all, but I do think that T3 is kind of underrated, and there are a lot of things in that film that make the flaws in T2 feel more glaring to me. But so far as the characters and the way they interact, I believe them more in T3, and I'm more behind them, I think, in T3. And I think that the finale of that movie is just such an emotional gut punch. I think it's actually more resonant than the ending of T2. And there is a tightness to T3 where it's kind of knowing what it is, and it's kind of leaning more into the humor in a way that, again, feels less self-serious compared to T2. One of my problems in this movie is the humor in T2, because yeah, like James Cameron, his humor it's a choice. It's very cringe often, and I think he can get away with that in T2 enough. Just due to, again, the very self-aware nature of it. And, you know, obviously there's a lot of catchphrases that are very famous that the Terminator uses. And at times they do a good job of implementing that, but at other times it felt very out of place. It feels very forced and often not making sense in the greater scheme of things. It's just kind of there to be like a funny catchphrase. And I look at maybe Terminator 3, and I actually think that the catchphrases and such, I'm not saying they work perfectly, but they do feel a little bit more organic. I just wish that maybe Cameron had leaned, in particular in this film, I wish he had leaned more into that kind of, again, the humor, the campy sort of Euro trash energy in contrast to the seriousness of it. I think is, again, that's what's really impactful. Now, I do think that the full ending of T2 is really emotionally powerful, and I like it, but I really struggle with the very, very end of the movie. When I say the very end, I mean like maybe the last 60 seconds, 30 seconds, something like that. It reminds me a lot of like David Fincher's Seven, the ending to that. It's very like, ugh, like if we had just snipped a little bit off the top, we're good. I think it would have been so much better. There's a lot of narration in Terminator, obviously, and here Sarah is doing the narration as she is passing the baton on to her son. But a lot of it just feels very tacked on, as if we are scrambling to find some sort of meaning, some sort of point to this. And it's like, I don't think you need that. We don't need to like look at the camera and be like, isn't it great that we're all better people? Oftentimes it feels like James Cameron is trying to find meaning for something, and it does feel disingenuous. This is a fun action movie, and I think that's what it should be. It is beautiful, it is groundbreaking, but trying to give it some sort of cerebral significance, that leaning more into the sci-fi sort of angle to it, I don't think it's necessary, as I said. So yes, there are little issues here and there that I wish we could clean up a little bit, but I do love this movie. As I said, it is one of my favorite of the, you know, big blockbuster summer American action movies, and as I said, I think it is one of the best James Cameron movies I've ever seen personally. This movie just screams everything summer to me, American summer. And as it should, it makes me think of like Pepsi and food courts at the mall. It makes me think of like skateboarding during the summer. But then seeing something so massive just cut through that American way of life in such a brutal sort of way, and we hadn't seen it in this way, I think it's just, again, really, really fantastic. So yes, I mean, I think most people have seen this movie, but I think it is great to return to. And it's like fantastic for like a July 4th weekend or something like that, or just a summer weekend. So yeah, obviously I recommend it. But that is my review. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'm going to plug my website as always. It is deepfocuslens.com. I'm an artist. I do commission portraits, and I also sell prints of my work. If that is something that you're interested in, you can always go to the website below. And if you have a question about a commission or a print, you can email me. My email is in the description box below as well. Also, I'd like to give a shout out to my patrons, who are fantastic. Guys, thank you so much for your support. Welcome to the new members. If you are interested in supporting, the link for that is below, as well as the rest of my social media information. You can watch more videos here, and you can subscribe if you'd like. Catch you next time.